Well, good morning, everybody. We have a beautiful day here in Alabama again. Those tomatoes over there are getting so big. They're loaded with fruits. I can't wait to have my first BLT or make some salsa. Everything is growing really well. I'm mixing up some nutrients. I'm going to feed a few plants, and thought I'd take you along and show you what I do. I get a lot of questions on my channel, and I love every single one of them. I love to answer the questions. I guess two of the most top questions I get are, how often do I water, especially being in rock, and how often do I feed, and what do I feed? So, and I've shown this many times and talked about it many times on my channel, and I don't mind repeating it. I don't mind at all. I think those are valid questions, and when you see somebody growing in rock, river rock, lava rock, pea gravel, etc., I'm sure that question comes to mind. Why would you not think that? You know, how often are you having to water when you're growing in rock? You know, and the orchids are loving that sunshine this morning. They're growing so strong, so many new shoots, new canes, bulbs, lots and lots of root growth. Remember, the media plays no part in nutrition. The media is just there to hold the plant in the pot. That's all it's there for. I think that's the biggest thing I think people struggle with when they grow orchids, is that it's hard to get your mindset out of the growing soil style. The media, whether you're in bark or moss or pumice or river rock or lava rock or pea gravel or pieces of charcoal or anything, it's just there to hold the plants in place. That's all it's there for. It's just something to hold the pot in the plant, or hold the plant in the pot. And I think people struggle with that. I really do. I think people struggle with that. Anyway, I'm going to mix up some nutrients real quick. I've got a few plants I want to soak, but I want to show you here. It hasn't rained for several days, and you see the moisture on this pot still. And this is planted in really large pieces of lava rock. It still has a root mass down in there, and the roots are not great. It's mostly dead roots on this one, but this was a rescue. It is doing well, and it has shot up a flower spike, which I was not expecting. I've only had this plant for about 30 days, and I'm surprised that it's shooting up a flower spike like that. It is growing new roots, and it has a brand new cane started. I'm not sure if that shows down in there, but there is a brand new cane started down in there. So I think it's responding, and dendrobians do that. I've always had good success with dendrobians. They're one of my favorite orchids. But I want to point this out. You know, one of the questions I get, like I said, is how often do I water? And again, that's a good question, especially being in rock. When I take my plants, I let them sit and I let them soak in the nutrient solution. So the pot soaks up moisture, the media, whatever it is, soaks up moisture as much as it can. The roots that are in the pot soak up moisture, and the more roots in the pot, the more moisture it's going to be able to soak up and retain. But everything that's there, the entire unit itself, sucks up moisture and holds on to that, and it stays damp for several days. Several days it'll stay damp deep down inside of it. Even though the top of it looks a little bit dry, deep down in the pot it's still moist. I can look around and I can see green roots on all these plants, which means they're well hydrated. They still haven't dried out completely. Anyway, it stays damp for several days, and then I give them several days of dry cycle, so maybe once a week I have to water. And excuse me. When I let them sit and soak in a nutrient solution, I use a little timer, a little digital timer. I set it for like 15 to 20 minutes usually, sometimes more, sometimes less. I'll put that timer on, let them sit and soak for 20 minutes, and the timer goes off, I come out, take those plants out, and take a handful of pots and put them back in there and swap them out. And I do that over a period of several hours, and everybody gets well hydrated, a good feeding, and they're all good for another week, even longer if I wanted to. Now, one of the reasons I've explained before why I grow in these type of media, and remember the media is just there to hold the plant in the pot. It wouldn't make a difference if it was charcoal or rock or moss or bark or all types of material you could use. But it's just there to hold the plant in the pot. It doesn't serve any nutritional purpose. It doesn't do anything. because I use this type of media, I can water more often if I want to. There's lots and lots of airflow, so I don't need to worry about roots rotting or things becoming too wet. They don't stay saturated for that length of time. After several days, they're starting to dry back a little bit, and the roots are ready to take more nutrients and moisture again if they needed to. So it enables me, like I said before, that it gives me control. It enables me to be able to feed more often. And if you think about it, and I tell people this, it's one of the secrets to growing orchids is anytime you have a question, ask yourself, how do orchids grow in the wild? And you have to ask yourself, how often would an orchid get fed in the wild hanging on a tree? Every time it would rain, every single time it would rain, nutrients would get washed down to that orchid. So every time it got rain, they would get moisture, but they would also get food. They would also get a good feeding. So I just kind of mimic Mother Nature. I think anybody who grows and grows orchids and they try and mimic Mother Nature is going to be a much better orchid grower. Anyway, let me take you over here very slowly and show you kind of what I'm up to. Hope that won't make anybody dizzy. I'm going to pop you on a tripod here. Hang on just a second, bumpy ride coming. There we go. Make sure you can see everything. I've got my TDS meter. I've got Jack's 51226. I've got calcium nitrate. I've got a little pipette so I can measure up my liquid seaweed. And let me show you kind of what I do. And I've got a handful of orchids sitting here too that are getting ready to have a drink. This is rainwater that I collect off my roof, and normally it comes off the roof somewhere between 2 and 5 parts per million. And right now I'm at 7. I'm not sure if that's showing up, but it's at 7 parts per million. I don't, if anybody has confused people on YouTube about how to mix up nutrients and how to grow orchids, it's probably me. I've probably caused more trouble and and confused more people than anybody out there, and that wasn't my intent. I think it's important that people understand nutrients and how they work with plants, and understand especially mobile nutrients and immobile nutrients. It allows you to be able to diagnose your plants. You can look at your plants and whether they've got black leaf tips or brown leaf tips, or lower leaves are fading or upper leaves are fading, or new shoots are dying back, or root tips are dying back, or your spike is dying back, or your buds are blasting, etc. If you understand mobile nutrients, immobile nutrients, and I have done videos on that before, that will allow you to diagnose and kind of pinpoint what the issue is and how to get rid of it and how to, remedy it. So don't get so hung up on the numbers. Everybody feeds differently. My plants are outside. We're in the mid 80s to 90 degree temperatures, very, very warm here in Alabama. I have lots of new growth, new shoots, new canes, new bulbs, couple flower spikes, lots and lots of root growth. And so my plants are growing very, very strong right now. I could feed them really, really a very high amount of nutrients, but again, I kind of mimic Mother Nature. Plants would never get 300-400 parts per million hanging on a tree. They would normally only get probably anywhere from 5 parts per million, maybe up to 25 parts per million. I feed a little bit stronger than that, but don't get so hung up on the parts per million numbers and how strong or how weak your solution is. Letting it vary from one side of the spectrum to the other is good. I think it gives plants a little bit more varied feed. Same with your pH. Don't get so hung up on the pH. As long as your pH is within certain ranges, allowing it to swing and go up and down across the spectrum, across the pH chart, allows those plants to absorb different nutrients and get a little bit more of a varied feed. And I think your plants are going to do much, much better for you. So anyway, I'm at 7 parts per million. This calcium nitrate. And I'm just going to take pinches of it. And I'm going to throw, I've got about 2.5 gallons of water here. I measured it out with a gallon jug. or with a gallon pitcher, so I know I've got about 2.5 gallons of water in here, and that's not important, but just to give you an idea, 3 little pinches. Make sure you put the lid on that so you don't splash water in it and ruin your nutrients. But that's only 3 tiny little pinches between my fingers and 2.5 gallons. I'm probably going to end up with somewhere between 60 and 80 parts per million. Calcium nitrate is a great source of nitrogen for your plants. It has 15%, the particular calcium nitrate that I'm using has 15% nitrogen in it and 18% calcium. So it's a little bit stronger than a 1-to-1 ratio, which is perfect. Anytime you give plants nitrogen, you want to make sure they have about the same amount of calcium as also, where you can get tall, spindly, weak growths that have trouble standing up on their own. They're going to want to fall over. They're not going to have a lot of strength inside of them. Orchids in the wild, anytime it rained, they would get calcium. Calcium sloughs off from the trees. It's leached out by the trees, the leaves, etc. And anytime they would get rained on, they would get some calcium. So again, I kind of mimic Mother Nature, and I keep going back to that. If you ask yourself that question, how do these plants grow in the wild? How do orchids grow in nature and don't have these issues? It'll answer a lot of those questions. It'll help you. And now we're at 83, 84. So that's real good for calcium nitrate. Now I'm also going to add the Jax 5-12-26, and I like the 2-part mix because of it allows me a lot of flexibility. And you can use MSU, great fertilizer, absolutely a great fertilizer. I'm going to put 3 pinches in here also. Actually, I'm going to go with 4 today. You can use MSU fertilizer, the Better Grow fertilizer. I've used that one before. MSU I've never used, but I've looked on their website and read enough about them and looked at their labels to know that that's a really, really good fertilizer. They make a great product, really, really good product. You can't go wrong with that one. The Better Grow is also a really good product to use. It's very easily available. First Raise is another one, and I'm partial to the Jax. The Jax I've been using for, I couldn't tell you how long I've been using it, for many, many, many years. Probably well over 15 years. And I've used it on house plants and in my garden, on my orchids, etc., etc. Used it hydroponically when I used to grow hydroponically, and that's where I learned how to use it and understand nutrients. And I'm very comfortable with it and confident. And I've said before that whatever nutrient you use, you have to be comfortable with it, and you have to have some confidence in it. Don't keep switching up your nutrients. Stick to one nutrient and use them till you've learned how to use it. And you know how your plants are responding, and that also will help you. So we were at 83, and now we're at 189, 190. So that's a good mix. Usually I will feed 125, 175 parts per million. This one's 190. It's not going to hurt it at all. Don't get so hung up on your numbers. Now the liquid seaweed, that's not going to raise your pH, raise your parts per million a whole lot. I don't use a lot of this every time I use it. You can use a lot of it because it doesn't do a lot. It won't change your parts per million. It won't raise it up a lot. It's mainly hormones, enzymes, etc., that kind of stuff, with a little bit of potassium. That's about 2.5 milliliters, which is a half a teaspoon. And this is 2.5 gallons, I'm going to remind you again. But because I use this almost every time I feed, I'm not so worried about how much I'm using because I'm adding just a little tiny bit with it. You can see there's a few little particles of some stuff floating around in there. The liquid seaweed's not breaking down. It just clumps up sometimes in the jug, and it doesn't hurt anything. It doesn't hurt it at all. It'll dissolve. But the enzymes and the hormones, it's kind of what makes plants grow. Hormones are what dictate a plant to grow vegetation, grow roots, go into a flower spike. Hormones are dictated by usually light and temperature, things of that nature. And again, because I use the liquid seaweed all the time, I just put a little bit in each every time I use it. And again, just the way I grow. And I'll show you, we were at 190, and now we're at 195. See, that didn't raise it a whole lot. That did not raise it a whole lot. Anyway, that's how I mix up nutrients. And this is how I water my orchids. I let them sit and soak. Let me pop you out of here real quick. I let them just sit and soak. All these plants have some really big shoots, really big canes. And I want each one of my new growths to get as big as the previous canes or shoots, the previous growths. I want my new canes, new bulbs, new shoots to get at least as big as the previous growths, or bigger preferably. And I don't want them to only become half size and not get full size. I don't want them to, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, if your 10 is your best, is the best your orchid can grow. I don't want to grow orchids at a 4 or a 5. I want them to grow at a 10. I want them to reach their maximum potential. So I'll go inside and I'll set a timer, come back out here in 20 minutes and swap some of these plants out. And you can see the water's up over the bottom of them. Doesn't hurt them. You can spray this nutrient solution on your plants. It won't hurt them. But anyway, that's how I grow. That's how I feed them, and that's how I water. And I'm going to let them sit here and soak for 15, 20 minutes, and I'm going to come out and swap a few more out. Not much else to add. It's very, very simple. I probably overcomplicate things, and probably have overcomplicated things for a lot of people, and I don't, again, not my intention. But understanding mobile nutrients, immobile nutrients, and understanding kind of how plants utilize certain nutrients makes you a better grower, enables you to be able to fix what issues you're having with your plant, diagnose different types of issues. One of the other questions I get all the time is leaving my plants outside in the rain. Rick, are you worried about leaving your plants outside in the rain? They get rained on, especially your phalaenopsis. No, I'm not. I'm not at all. In the wild, they would get rained on, hanging on trees. They're going to get rained on all the time. And in heavy monsoon seasons, they would get rained on a lot, daily for weeks on end. And it never seems to bother orchids in the wild. Same with pests. You have to ask that question again, how do orchids grow in the wild? And you know, all the mealybugs and aphids and spider mites, etc., don't just eat these plants all to pieces. How do they do that? I've got garden beds all over the place, and it's full of aphids and mealybugs and spider mites and scale, etc., etc., etc. I hate to admit that, but you can find some of that stuff out there. No matter what plants you're looking around, you're going to find some of that. You can find it in every garden. And my orchids are right here, sitting on it in that shade house. They're exposed to it, but they don't have any issues with it. In nature, orchids would have lots and lots of calcium around them. The calcium keeps them thick, keeps them strong, keeps them healthy, keeps them resistant to pests. And any pest that sticks its mouth part in an orchid to suck its meal out of is going to go find an easier way to feed, is going to go find a plant that's not as thick, not as strong, not as hard. And again, you have to ask yourself, what's one of the biggest differences, and I think this is key, what's one of the biggest differences that orchids growing outside in the wild, in tropical jungles, on trees, at the base of trees, what's the biggest difference between those plants and the plants that you have in your greenhouse, on your windowsill, in your grow room, in your basement, in your spare bedroom, on your kitchen table, etc., etc.? What's the biggest difference between the ones that we have inside and the ones we have outside? And that biggest difference is rain. Rain. rain not only flushes the plants and moves the nutrients back around so they can feed again, but it washes off spider mites, mealybugs, etc., etc. Most of those small pest insects, they have to have very still conditions. They can't do well when there's lots of breeze out like there is today. They can't move around very well with that, but they also have to have dry conditions. And so if you have your orchids inside, the best thing you could do for them is occasionally put them in a shower or take them outside and let them get rained on. It's going to wash them off. Any pests that are starting to get accumulated are going to get washed off. I don't ever spray my orchids. I don't ever spray them for pests. I don't use any kind of pesticide, insecticide, fungicide, bactericides. I never use anything like that, and I don't have any issues with them whatsoever. And it has nothing to do with the media that I grow in. It has nothing to do with bark or moss. It causes that? No. The biggest difference is the rain, is natural weather conditions. That's what does it. So the best thing you could do for your orchids is to rinse them off occasionally. Put them in the shower and rinse them off. Put them in your sink and spray them off, including your phalaenopsis. Remember, calcium is responsible for building up those cell walls. And if you have, let me turn you back around here. If you have a great big shoot coming up, a big growth like that, calcium is stacking those cells, stacking those cells, stacking those cells, stacking those cells, and stacking those cells up. And the only reason it's doing that is because this plant has been triggered by hormones. Hormones are triggered by light, temperature, length of day, etc. And so this plant has been told ideal conditions, start growing new shoots, start growing new roots, start growing new flower spike, etc. And as it's stacking up those cells, nutrients, high concentrations of nutrients are being pumped to that new shoot, that new cane, that very new root tip, new shoots, that very new root tip, that flower spike, etc. High concentrations. Research has shown that new shoots, canes, and root tips, flower spikes, bulbs, etc., all those new growths have 5 to 8 times higher nutrient concentration than the rest of the plant does. So as that plant is, keep that in mind, so as that plant is stacking up those calcium cells and stacking those calcium cells, almost like Legos, building blocks, is stacking up those cell walls, and I'm putting this into, very crude terms here, but I'm just trying to get a picture, a visual. I'm trying to create one of those aha moments, that light bulb going off in your head kind of moments. As that plant is stacking up those calcium cells and stacking up calcium cells and stacking those cells up, if it runs out of calcium, nutrients are still being pumped to it. High concentrations of nutrient are still being pumped to it. And those are going to concentrate in that new tip, that new cane, that new bulb, that new root tip, that new shoot. And if it doesn't have the calcium and it can continue to grow, the nutrients, because it's been told, start pumping nutrients, we've got a lot of activity up here, those nutrients are going to build up, and anybody who's ever over-fertilized a plant before knows that high concentrations of nutrients will burn new tissue back. It will burn new leaf tip back. And that's where you end up with new shoots dying back. You get bud blast, you get new shoots dying back, you get root tips that die back, and phalaenopsis, where does a phalaenopsis grow? Where does the new growth on a phalaenopsis come from? It grows from the crown, those new leaves that come out of this very center of the plant. So if you're not giving your phalaenopsis enough calcium, and calcium is an immobile nutrient. They can't transport calcium from one part of their cells to another like they can nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium or magnesium. That's where it's really important to understand mobile nutrients and immobile nutrients. Calcium is an immobile nutrient. They have to have a constant supply of calcium around them so they can always, in case they're growing, be able to build those cells up. So as those cells are building up, they run out of calcium, nutrients start to accumulate, and you get dieback. You get those root tips burned back. You get buds that are blast. You get spikes that die back. You get new shoots that die back. You get new canes that die back. During the early spring, when cattleyas down in Florida get that black rot, as they call it, that's from calcium deficiency. St. Augustine Orchid Society will explain that to you. The American Orchid Society will explain that to you. It's very, very simple. Very, very simple. That's why I push that calcium on them. Make sure, super important. But phalaenopsis grow from the crown. People think that, well, you get water in the crown of your phalaenopsis and it dies back. You have to keep that water out of the crown of your phalaenopsis. You have to dab it out with a Q-tip or a piece of tissue or something. But I got to go back again to orchids growing in the wild. How do all the phalaenopsis in the wild hanging on trees? You know, majority of them are grown in, I believe, Thailand, places like that. How? Taiwan or Thailand, I believe, is where most of them come from. But how do they survive without somebody there to make sure all the water coming out of the, getting out of the crowns of somebody, And they don't always grow where they're hanging on the tree, where they're hanging in a position where the water runs out of the crown. Not always, not always. It's because of calcium. Calcium is what keeps that from happening. It keeps that center crown rot from starting. Once the leaves start to die back, bacteria takes over, fungus takes over, etc. And people think it's from the water. It's not the water. Mine stay outside all the time and get rained on and get rained on and get rained on and get rained on. And I've never lost a single leaf on a phalaenopsis to crown rot. None of it, never. So take your plants, put them in the sink, take them outside and let them get rained on. Best thing you can do for your orchids. The very best thing you can do for your orchids. One of the very best things you can do for your orchids. Anyway, I'm going to go set my timer, come back out and swap some plants out. I'm going to enjoy my afternoon. Thank you for all those questions. I love those questions. They're great. Thank you for all the kind words, the thoughts, the prayers, such kind words. You guys give me so much strength. I don't know what else to say. I'm overwhelmed sometimes and literally get a tear brought to my eye. You guys touch my heart so often with your kind words, and I can't thank you enough. Anyway, enjoy your day, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll talk later.